March 4, 1944, dawn over Wittenberg. Hoarfrost rims the Elbe reeds. The air smells of coal smoke as Freya sets begin to buzz. On the plotting boards, blips gather into one arrow, an 8th Air Force stream for Berlin. Controllers of Luftwaffe Reich call vectors, and pilots of JG-26 and JG-11 run to Bf-109Gs and FW-190As. Sure, the old rule still holds beyond the Rhine. The bombers will be alone. They climb from frost-slick dispersals. Near Steinhude Meer, the first interceptors level, and then see thin shapes sliding from the contrails above, drop tanks still fastened under the wings. Not thunderbolts. Sleeker, faster, falling in pairs at 25,000 feet. It resolves at last. Fighters with the bombers. On the scopes, plots mingle. Vapor lines twist and vanish. The newcomers jettison 108-gallon paper tanks and surge on Packard-Merlin power. Over 700 miles of reach and about 440 miles per hour at altitude. Enough to leap ahead. Wheel back and still stay with the stream. Bf-109s peel. FU-190s try head-on. Yet the laminar flow wing Mustangs keep appearing where the next attack should be. From command rooms to dispersal pads, the recognition spreads. The bombers have brought guardians to Berlin itself. The deep interior is no longer a sanctuary. The defensive air war has turned a corner, and now comes how these escorts reached so far, and who built the chain that carried them here. By late 1942, the 8th Air Force's vision of daylight precision bombing had become both its creed and its curse. The B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator, symbols of American industrial might, could carry destruction deep into the Reich. Yet they could not defend themselves, once beyond the reach of escort. Fighters like the P-47 Thunderbolt, with its brute power and heavy armament, burned fuel too quickly. The graceful British Spitfire could barely make it to the Dutch coast. Each time the bombers pressed farther into Germany, the Luftwaffe waited like wolves beyond the Rhine, tearing into formations that could neither outclimb nor outfight them. In August 1943, the twin raids on Schweinfurt and Regensburg laid bare the arithmetic of failure. 60 bombers vanished in one day, 600 men lost or captured. At Münster, another raid left so few aircraft returning that ground crews wept at empty dispersal pads. The doctrine of self-defending bombers collapsed under gunfire and black smoke. For American planners, the lesson was brutal. Without a fighter that could go all the way to Berlin and back, the daylight offensive would bleed itself to death. Across the Channel, General Adolf Galland and his peers in Luftwaffe Reich were confident this imbalance would last. They regarded the American strategy as folly, a predictable slaughter that would exhaust enemy morale long before Germany's own resources ran dry. Yet while Luftwaffe aces toasted their certainty, engineers in California and Kansas were rewriting the rules of range and endurance. North American Aviation, once a minor player in the aircraft race, was testing an agile new design, built not for America but for a British order that few expected would change the air war's destiny. Its name, soon to be whispered across Europe, was Mustang Autumn 1940. Britain fought for breath. The Battle of Britain had burned through its supply of fighters, and the island's skies trembled daily under Luftwaffe assault. In Washington, the British Purchasing Commission turned to an unlikely partner, North American Aviation, a firm better known for its trainers than for combat machines. They requested licensed P-40s. North American countered with an audacious offer to design an entirely new fighter from scratch. In just 117 days, a small team led by Austrian-born engineer Edgar Schmude produced a prototype that seemed to leap a generation ahead. Designated the NA-73X, it married clean laminar flow wings with a slim, low-drag fuselage and a bubble canopy that gave the pilot an almost unhindered view of the horizon. The first flight on October 26, 1940, revealed startling speed and agility at low altitude, but the Allison V-1710 engine gasped above 15,000 feet. The Mustang's promise seemed destined to stay earthbound, yet Britain's engineers saw beyond that flaw. In 1942, at Rolls-Royce's experimental shop in Hucknall, they mounted a Merlin 61, complete with a two-stage, two-speed supercharger, into the same airframe. The transformation was immediate. Test pilot Ronald Harker later wrote that the hybrid behaved like a different breed of animal. With the Merlin, the aircraft tore past 430 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, climbed faster than a Spitfire, and could stay airborne for nearly twice the distance. The Americans soon joined the miracle. Packard in Detroit began license building the Merlin, ensuring mass production without reliance on Britain's strained factories. Thus was born the P-51B, an Anglo-American fusion of aerodynamic insight and mechanical precision. By mid-1943, the first squadrons arrived in England, their fuselages gleaming in fresh olive drab, assigned to the 354th Fighter Group of the 9th Air Force. To the pilots, it looked like no other aircraft, a machine that might, at last, carry them to Berlin and home again. The next test would prove whether promise could survive combat. December 1943, England lay under slate clouds as the new P-51Bs of the 354th Fighter Group waited on frozen tarmac at Boxted and Lashendon. Orders came from V-8 Fighter Command, deep escort to Bremen and Kiel. For the first time, American bombers would not have to fly unguarded into the industrial heart of Germany. Crews tightened parachute straps, checked 50 caliber belts, and watched vapor curl from the Mustangs Merlin exhausts. At Aero 900 hours, the long stream lifted eastward across the North Sea. B-17s and B-24s in tight, glittering boxes with their guardians weaving high above them. Over the German frontier, radar plots appeared on Luftwaffe Reich screens. To the controllers and to the pilots of JG-1 and JG-54, it seemed a familiar script. The Thunderbolts would soon turn back, leaving the bombers bare. They climbed to intercept at 27,000 feet, the sun glinting from their FW-190A cowls and BF-109G canopies. But when the formations met near Bremen, the rhythm broke. The Silver Fighters did not turn. They climbed higher. Their drop tanks still hung beneath the wings as they rolled inverted and plunged into the interceptor's path. Gun camera reels from that morning caught moments of disbelief. German fighters banking too late. Mustang tracers crossing their tails from hundreds of yards beyond expected range. One Staffelkapitän of JG-1 later called it chaos among the clouds, a battle without pattern or warning. By noon, 12 Luftwaffe aircraft had fallen. Several more were crippled. The bombers pressed on to their targets and turned home almost untouched. For the 8th Air Force, Bremen marked more than victory. It proved the long road to deep escort had finally ended. And for the Luftwaffe, the realization was grim. The sky over Germany would never again belong to them. Ahead lay the mission that would drive the point home. The first escort to Berlin, March 4, 1944. Dawn over East Anglia. Engines thunder across frozen runways as the first great armada of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators rises into pale light. Their destination, Berlin. It is a raid the Luftwaffe had long believed impossible in daylight. By 800 hours, more than 600 bombers stream eastward across the North Sea, contrails knitting into a white highway towards Saxony. German radar posts near Bremen and Magdeburg light up with frantic calls. To them it looks like every other mass strike. Heavy bombers bound for death once the escorts turn back. At Jagdgeschwader 11's airfields, mechanics wrench cowlings from BF-109Gs slick with frost. Pilots jog to revetments, certain the old pattern will repeat. But when the first formations reach Wittenberg, something new appears above the silver trail. Sleek single-seat fighters keeping pace even as the Ruhr falls behind. The voices on Luftwaffe Reich's frequencies crackle with disbelief. Jäger mit den Bombern. Fighters with the bombers. From Oranienburg to the outskirts of Berlin, the sky becomes a swirling maze of vapor and fire. Colonel Thomas J.J. Christian's 357th Fighter Group drives straight into the intercepting waves, the Packard-Merlins howling at 400 miles per hour. Among the pilots, a young Lieutenant Chuck Yeager scores his first victories, watching two BF-109s disintegrate under converging streams of 50 caliber fire. Luftwaffe. Staffel after staffel breaks formation, their pilots caught between astonishment and fury. By day's end, Luftwaffe Reich has lost nearly 70 aircraft. Dozens more limp back riddled or crash on landing. The bombers, shielded all the way to the capital and back, return with minimal losses. For Adolf Galland and his peers, the conclusion is inescapable. The air war's balance has shifted forever. The Reich's airspace, once inviolate, now lay open, and German command began a desperate search to uncover what machine and what secret had made it so. In the stunned aftermath of the March 1944 Berlin raid, the halls of the Oberkommando der Luftwaffe in Berlin buzzed with disbelief and unease. Analysts pored over reconnaissance photos, pilot reports, and wreckage fragments hauled from muddy fields west of the Elbe. Somehow, American fighters had flown farther and fought longer than any calculation had allowed. Intelligence officers sent urgent cables to units across Germany, recover every piece of Mustang debris, every unfamiliar fuel line, every wing section. What they found defied expectation. Scattered across meadows and forests were the remains of jettisoned fuel tanks, lightweight, seamless, and internally coated for self-sealing. Their plumbing systems were elegantly simple, feeding directly into the aircraft's internal reserves with minimal drag penalties. Engineers at Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf examined captured samples, noting with quiet astonishment how little waste or excess weight the American designers had tolerated. The Mustang's laminar flow wing, its surface smoother and thinner than any in the Luftwaffe's inventory, reduced drag so drastically that, with twin 75-gallon drop tanks, it could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and still fight its way home. At the Luftwaffe's intelligence briefings, a new and chilling phrase began circulating: Langstreckenjäger, the long-range fighter. The myth of Germany's protective air shield was gone, replaced by the specter of an enemy that could appear anywhere, at any altitude, and stay there longer than exhaustion or fuel would drive it away. Hitler, enraged, demanded countermeasures: heavier flak belts around the capital, night dispersal of airfields, and the immediate acceleration of the Me-262 jet program. But technology could not bridge the widening gulf of production and endurance. German pilots now found their stamina failing before their engines did, while the Allies replaced both men and machines at a rate Germany could no longer imagine. The next chapter unfolded not in the skies, but in the factories that made such miracles routine. By the dawn of 1944, the United States had transformed itself into what Roosevelt called the arsenal of democracy. Across the continent, factory skylines glowed through the night, and the rhythmic hammering of rivet guns echoed like an industrial drumbeat. In Inglewood, California, and Dallas, Texas, North American Aviation's assembly lines stretched for nearly a mile under corrugated roofs. Their teams of men and women, engineers, mechanics, and newly trained welders, turned out hundreds of P-51Bs and Cs every month. Each aircraft demanded roughly 145,000 man-hours, yet the scale of America's wartime industry absorbed the cost as if it were nothing. While Germany counted every liter of fuel and every spool of aluminum, the United States poured forth machines with the casual abundance of a nation untouched by occupation or blockade. In Detroit, Packard's vast East Grand Boulevard plant produced the Merlin V1650 engine under license from Rolls-Royce, each one assembled to tolerances so fine that British inspectors called them better than the original. Rail cars carried the engines to North Americans' plants. Within days, they roared to life on the test stands, their polished exhausts spitting blue flame. Between 1942 and 1945, more than 15,000 Mustangs emerged from the production lines, each one a fusion of American industry and Anglo-European engineering brilliance. To sustain them, the Allies built a logistical network unmatched in military history. Spare parts flowed by air to forward depots. Replacement pilots trained in a matter of weeks. German factories under relentless bombardment could barely repair what they lost, let alone innovate. Even the Luftwaffe's marvels, the FW-190D9 and the Me-262, arrived in dribbles crippled by shortages and sabotage. By March 1944, the P-51 accounted for nearly half of all Allied escort sorties. The equation was simple. Germany's fuel and pilots were vanishing faster than they could be replaced. Ahead lay the campaigns that would turn dominance into inevitability. By the spring of 1944, the P-51 Mustang had become more than an escort. It was the blade point of Allied air power. In February's Big Week offensive, from the 20th to the 25th, American and British planners unleashed a coordinated assault on Germany's aircraft industry. Bombers struck factories from Leipzig to Regensburg, while the new long-range Mustangs swept ahead and alongside, slashing through assembling interceptor formations before they could climb into organized defense. German pilots, accustomed to dictating the moment of combat, now faced an enemy that seemed omnipresent. One Luftwaffe veteran later recalled, "They appeared everywhere at once, before we took off above our bases behind us when we landed." By June, that omnipresence had matured into outright mastery. The new P-51D model, with its bubble canopy, offered pilots near-perfect visibility, a transparent dome over a cockpit of concentrated power. 6 Browning .50 caliber guns lined the wings, and with twin 108-gallon tanks slung beneath, its range exceeded 1,600 kilometers. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, the Mustangs filled the skies over Normandy, intercepting every Luftwaffe attempt to strike the beaches. The few German formations that rose were torn apart within minutes. Allied pilots flew low over the coast roads, strafing convoys and isolating the front. For the first time in the war, an invasion unfolded without the shadow of enemy aircraft. From new airfields carved into French soil, the Mustangs pressed the advantage relentlessly. Munich, Vienna, even the oil fields of Ploiești fell within reach. Each mission further dismantled the Luftwaffe's structure, draining it of aircraft, fuel, and faith. The psychological collapse was as real as the physical one. Rookies entered combat against opponents who outnumbered, outclimbed, and outshot them. For the Allies, it was a new sensation, an unshakable belief that the air itself belonged to them. Yet beneath that confidence lay another truth. The same engines of domination now shaped the lives, fears and hopes of those beneath the endless drone of Allied power. By the autumn of 1944, the air war over Europe had lost all balance. Each morning, the people of the Reich woke to the same sight, pale streaks etched high across the sky, tracing the path of the 8th Air Force's endless streams. Beneath those contrails glinted the faint silver flashes of P-51 Mustangs, circling like sentinels. For those on the ground, they were symbols of inevitability. In Kassel, Magdeburg, and Brunswick, children counted the specks overhead until the earth shook beneath falling bombs. The once proud Luftwaffe, which had terrified Europe in 1940, was now a hunted remnant. Fuel shortages strangled every squadron. Many airfields received barely enough aviation spirit for a single scramble each day. Pilots of Jagdgeschwader 300 and 301, defenders of the homeland, waited in their cockpits for orders that rarely came. When they did, the climb to altitude was a climb toward despair. Reports from field commanders paint the same grim pattern: reluctant engagements, aircraft abandoned on landing strips, missions cancelled for want of gasoline or weather. One weary Staffelkapitan wrote, "We are hunted from takeoff to landing." To the civilians below, the Mustang's gleam earned a new name: De Silben Tod, the Silver Death. Its silhouette became the prelude to ruin, its presence a reminder that the Reich no longer owned its own air. Meanwhile, the men of the 8th Air Force flew with a confidence their predecessors had never known. Losses once measured in squadrons were now counted in single digits. Crews who had survived Schweinfurt and Regensburg at last felt what safety meant. The psychological war, long Germany's weapon of fear, had turned back upon itself. And from that dominance came a new freedom, an Allied sky under which armies could now move without restraint. By early 1944, with the sky firmly under Allied control, the nature of the air war changed from survival to systematic destruction. The P-51 Mustang, once conceived as a bodyguard for bombers, now became an instrument of strategic dismemberment. Its reach allowed the Allies to strike not just at cities, but at the arteries that fed the Reich's war machine. Deep within central Germany, the synthetic fuel complexes at Leuna, Merseburg, and Brux fell under unrelenting assault. Without aviation fuel, even the finest Messerschmitts became useless metal. Rail junctions at Halle and marshalling yards at Kassel and Frankfurt were reduced to tangled steel. The Luftwaffe's prized jet fields, Augsburg-Neuburg and Lechfeld, became smoking craters before many Me-262s ever left the ground. For the fighter groups that flew the Mustang, among them the 4th, 339th and 352nd, the mission evolved beyond escort duty. They became hunters. Roaming ahead of the bomber streams or striking independently, they swept airfields, rail convoys, and truck columns with relentless precision. Between January and May 1944, Mustang pilots claimed over 1,000 enemy aircraft destroyed in combat, many of them caught on the ground before they could even start their engines. These victories were more than tallies. They were the unraveling of an entire defense network. Each destroyed train delayed a division. Each cratered fuel plant dimmed the engines that powered Germany's final hopes. The bombing campaign now intertwined perfectly with Allied ground plans. When the invasion of Normandy began that June, the Luftwaffe managed only scattered sorties, unable to concentrate or refuel. The Reich's backbone, its transport, its oil, its sky, was broken. Yet even in triumph, the Mustang revealed its limits, and the months ahead would test how pilots and engineers stretched those boundaries as the war drew toward its furious end. For all its triumphs, the P-51 Mustang was no miracle without flaws. Its sleek fuselage concealed a vulnerability that every pilot feared: the liquid-cooled Merlin engine. A single rifle round through a coolant line could empty the system within minutes, turning the aircraft into a powerless glider. In the high frigid altitudes where bomber escorts flew, that failure was often fatal. Early models also faced their share of teething problems: Browning machine guns that froze or jammed during steep climbs, oxygen regulators that faltered above 25,000 feet, and cockpit heaters that left pilots half numb on winter missions. When Allied airfields pushed east into France after D-Day, the Mustangs faced a new enemy: weather. The winter of 1944-45 was brutal. Airstrips turned to sheets of ice. Engines refused to start. Canopies froze shut. North American's engineers responded quickly, fitting improved cabin heaters, reinforced canopy rails, and upgraded fuel lines resistant to cold leaks. Maintenance crews learned to pre-warm engines before dawn takeoffs. Pilots, too, adapted, nursing their Merlins through long climbs, managing radiator flaps and resisting the temptation to overboost during dogfights. Experience, not perfection, kept them alive. The Luftwaffe, though crippled, continued to innovate. Rocket-armed FW-190s, jet-powered Me-262s, and the Me-163 Comet Point interceptors appeared in desperate bursts of resistance. Yet none could overcome the Mustang's reach or reliability. The Allied fighters' balance of speed, altitude, endurance, and production scale proved unanswerable. By the war's end, every limitation had become a lesson. Each solved problem a blueprint for the jet age that was dawning. From Berlin's shattered skies would emerge the doctrines and designs that defined aviation's next generation, carrying the Mustang's legacy far beyond the war it helped to end. When the guns fell silent in May 1945, the P-51 Mustang stood as more than a weapon. It was the embodiment of Allied mastery in the air. From its first sorties over Bremen to the final raids deep into Bavaria, it had flown farther, fought longer, and achieved what had once been deemed impossible: unbroken escort from England to Berlin and back. In Europe alone, Mustang pilots destroyed over 4,950 enemy aircraft, many of them claimed by men barely in their 20s who had learned to trust the sleek, silver machine that carried them through fire and flak. What began as an experimental British request had ended as the decisive instrument of victory. In the Pacific, the story repeated itself. P-51Ds based on Iwo Jima and later Okinawa stretched their range across the vast ocean, reaching Tokyo and escorting B-29 superfortresses in missions that mirrored the same miracle of endurance that had once shattered German defenses. Everywhere it flew, the Mustang erased distance as a weapon. Its blend of aerodynamic efficiency, speed, and economy of design became the template for post-war aviation thinking. Engineers studying its laminar flow wings and lightweight structure carried those lessons into the jet age. The North American F-86 Sabre, America's first great Cold War fighter, owed much of its lineage to the Mustang's balance of grace and lethality. For Germany, the gleam of those silver fighters over Berlin became the symbol of a war irretrievably lost. For the Allies, it proved that technology, industry, and courage could bend history itself. The Mustang bridged two eras, the twilight of the propeller and the dawn of the jet, and in doing so it redefined what domination of the sky truly meant. The legend had begun that morning in 1944, when German pilots first looked upward and saw the impossible made real. From the shattered airfields around Berlin to the misted hedgerows of East Anglia, the story of the P-51 Mustang remains written across the sky in pale contrails and fading echoes. On that cold March morning in 1944, As Luftwaffe commanders bent over their radar boards and saw the impossible, American fighters deep over Saxony, they felt the balance of the air war collapse in real time. The Mustang was not just an aircraft, it was a revelation that range and endurance could be as decisive as guns and armor. It carried with it the idea that mastery of the air was no longer about defending one's borders, but about erasing them. For the men who flew that day, the shock was unforgettable. German pilots who once hunted the bombers became the hunted themselves, fighting exhaustion and disbelief as the silver escorts dove through their formations. American crews, for the first time, returned from Berlin intact, watching the blackened continent slide away beneath their wings. The change was total, irreversible. Over the ruins of the Reich's capital, the Mustangs circled like silent heralds of a new age, the age of modern air power. Their triumph lay not only in destruction, but in what they revealed. That human ingenuity, once given form in metal and motion, could reach beyond fear and reshape history itself.